Hey, what's up? Ever pondered the secrets of the universe? Ever wondered if God intended for you specifically to have autism? Ever wondered if your friend becoming a furry was a fated event, planned out by the divine? Ever worried that you might be severe, humorless, supercilious, rough in love and promiscuous, yet lying with base-born or elderly women, or with prostitutes? Me too, and although I'm still learning much about astrology, I wish to depart some of that knowledge with you today in a digestible manner.
Time to learn! You wanna learn today!
A lot of the techniques that I'll be pulling from are from the Hellenistic era, which is what the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans would have used, but I won't be exclusively using older methods from that period. I consider myself to be on the lower levels of intermediate, and most of my skill comes from practice rather than books. Essentially, this is something that started out as a hobby that I'm passionate about. I love astrology, and that's why I want to discuss and teach it, but that doesn't inherently mean that I'm right about everything. So, if you encounter anything that you don't personally agree with, feel free to ignore it, or even correct me as long as it's not a disagreement on something that I am accurately following, such as methods that other astrologers would have used. Today we will be talking about the 7 main planets. The ancient Greeks looked up at the sky and saw twinkling little lights which they called asteres, or stars. But they also noticed that there were these stars that moved around, and they called those planetes asteres, or wandering stars. Although modern times have simplified the wording and terminology of what these words are, as well as what they mean, planets do in fact look like stars to the naked eye.
You see that? You see that right there? That's freaking Mars. That's freaking Mars right there. Look at this. Right next to the freaking moon. It's right next to the freaking moon. That's crazy. It's actually not crazy. It happens all the time.
There's a lot of things that are listed as significations for the planets in these older books, and well, at some point I will have to teach you what the planets taste like and, what body parts they rule over. We will keep things simple for the time being. I want to give you a taste of astrology that's not bitter and skeptical, so to speak. So, for now, we're not going to be remembering what colors and trees Mars rules over. Anyways, to start, let's talk about everyone's favorite planet, the moon. If it makes you feel any better that the moon is considered a planet, they had a special term for the sun and moon. They call them luminaries, which may be easier to digest. Anyways, the moon is one of the more complex of the planets, yet it often goes overlooked in both real life and in astrology. Not too many people talking about its impacts on the hormones of both men and women, for instance. It goes through a full cycle of the zodiac every 28 days or so. And over this period, it has all kinds of unique interactions with the sun that have tangible effects on not just the world around us, but on us as well. It's a part of the big 3 that people tie to the personality, but it's so much more than that. In many ways, the moon can be more important than the sun, especially if you were born at night. The phase of the moon when you were born will also have an impact on how it operates. The moon is a receptor of light, after all. It receives, reflects, and even blots out light. There's full moons, new moons, lunar and solar eclipses, but even the phases in between have their own meaning. All of these will have interesting impacts on the chart that no other placement does. Oh, and it also represents a number of very specific things in a chart, such as your relationship with your mother. You do have a good relationship with your mom, right? Haha. Moreover, it has associations with marriage, travels, your physical body, your early life, and in terms of your personality would deal with your inner world, emotions, and intuition. Its placement reflects the way that we process emotions as well as the more subconscious information. I've noticed that it has some relation to sleep as well, as if the stars align and the moon is afflicted in some way, it indicates stress, and it can cause issues with sleeping and peace of mind. I find that in many ways the moon and Mercury rule over matters associated with different aspects of the mind, and in a situation where the moon is situated in a sign ruled by Mercury, the moon takes on those aspects. I've read for a few people who have done coding, at least 2 of them professionally. In one case where it was in the 6th house, they wound up working their inner mind out in a sense, where they would do tasks that empowered the inner world to operate in such a way that it was similar to Ulalia's mind game, sort of like a muscle where it gets stronger and can eventually conceive of things in a more abstract yet structured way. But maybe none of this impresses you. Maybe you're sitting here waiting for me to get to some of the good planets, and to that I would say that the moon does not fuck around. This shit controls your finances, buddy. Do not underestimate it. Lastly, each planet rules over 2 signs each, while the luminaries rule over just 1. The moon itself rules over Cancer. We'll go over rulership at a later date, just keep these in the back of your head for now, and pay attention to this zodiac wheel's progression. Next up, we have the sun. The sun represents the spirit, parts of the outward projected self, the ego. If the moon is indicative of the intuition, the things that we grab from deep within, then the sun is the light that shines most evidently, your essence, so to speak. This is the placement that you're most likely familiar with, as depending on what sign it's in, you will act in accordance to the values held by that sign, which is in alignment to the planet that rules over it. The sun in a Mars-ruled sign acts with drive and purpose.
Hey buddy, I think you got the wrong door. The leather club's 2 blocks down.
Fuck you.
The sun in a Venusian sign is caring and gentle, at times at its own detriment. And these are the things that define you and how you view the world. It is your light, that which shows what is. The sun also represents your vitality. If it's negatively impacted, then health issues may be a problem. Although health is a multifaceted issue within astrology, which can be, a little bit complicated. The sun can also show problems with the person's own self-worth, since it represents the spirit.
I laugh at you before you can laugh at me, because your pennies have been in my ass.
It is worth noting that Aquarius and Libra sun, which the sun does poorly in, tend to place things above their own well-being. There are generally more signs of this, especially if it's a bigger problem, but both signs struggle to strike a nice balance between their needs and others, and both need to learn how to integrate their shadow in Leo and Aries respectively. But I don't want to hear any space racism, alright? Repeat after me. Pleasant in every sign if the circumstances align. The house it's in, the aspects it's making, all of it matters, because quite frankly, the sun can both nurture and destroy. Every other planet might as well be Icarus, the way that every planet just kind of gets vaporized in its presence. But that's not always a bad thing. Let's say hypothetically that there are some bad actors nearby, within about 16 or 17 degrees or so. Not anymore, there aren't. Interestingly, when something is within an exact degree of the sun, those qualities seamlessly merge and shine through even brighter. Aside from that, the sun also has to do with topics such as long travels, knowledge, and the pursuit of truth, as it is through their positioning near the sun that Mercury and the moon are able to observe and retain that light most directly. In that way, the sun represents that part of us that is most raw and unfiltered. It is our truth. It also represents adulthood, spirituality, and action. Oh, and the relationship with your father. Shout out to the 12th house for being a sort of pseudo milk store that dad just kind of, come and go from. Only instead of milk, you get neglect. My favorite. In some cases, the sun's influence can manifest in literal ways, as aspects between the sun and moon can reflect the relationships between both the native and their mother, or even father and mother. In the example before last, for instance, the sun represents the father, being in a place associated with loss, which is a place very difficult to see. The father is not around, or is, at the very least, not much of a father figure. Speaking of, the house placement is very relevant, as it shows the area of life that it'll be active within.
Oh, the misery! Every single person is my enemy!
And can give you a clue as to what it is that truly energizes you. For instance, the sun in the 9th can show someone who truly enjoys traveling, someone who knows about all kinds of different places and things. I know someone with both her sun and Mercury here, and not only is she highly intelligent, educated in all kinds of foreign countries, interested in language and everything in between, but she's also very fond of everything associated with flight and travel. Similarly, I know a guy with a couple of placements here in Leo, and, well... The sun rules over Leo, by the way. The next planet is a bit hard to see in the sky.
Oh, it's here. Yes, there he is. There he is. Yes, yes, there he is. Yes.
Mercury is practically glued to the sun, never more than 28 degrees separating. Much like ingenuity, it's always there, but that spark is so elusive, only ever truly shining for moments at a time. But shine it does.
Okay, give me your password.
My password?
Out with it.
Oral cum shot.
Oral cum shot. Yeah, that fits.
Mercury deals with matters of intelligence and how the native thinks and communicates. It's perhaps the most complicated planet to really decipher, as it delves into really complicated matters that aren't understood all that well in either science or psychology. In its most extreme, you would be able to see it create liars, master manipulators, thieves, and such. But at its best, it can create people who use these skills for good. People who wind up revolutionizing an entire field. Poets, scholars, and saints, should the rest of the chart permit it. To go back to the topic of coders, of all the charts that I've read, a few of them had Mercury in Sagittarius or Pisces. Mercury is considered to be very bad within these signs, yet within them lies a unique talent. Coding, much like autism, exists on a spectrum. You either have incomprehensible garbage or you have incomprehensible genius. My coder friend works for a very large company that I am not allowed to speak of. He has his Mercury in Sagittarius and his Moon in Virgo. He's essentially min-maxing, speccing into ADHD and autism at the same time. Multi-track drifting, if you will. Or, at the very least, that is what his doctors have diagnosed him with. Truly a dangerous combination. Interestingly, I've noticed that both the Sun and Mercury seem to cause problems with the mind when in poor condition. The mutable signs in particular seem to have a role in ADHD and autism whenever Mercury or the Moon is in a mutable sign and forming an unfavorable aspect with another planet, such as the Moon squaring or being in opposition to Mercury, although the 6th and 12th house are also implicated in some regard. You know, it's not an extensive list, and having been diagnosed with ADHD myself and having studied the matter outside of astrology, I think that I can pretty confidently say that there are generally multiple causes of varying severity. ADHD is a blanket term, and autism is a spectrum after all. I'm also not exactly sure what causes schizophrenia, but it's often associated with ADHD and autism within a lot of the studies I've read. A friend of mine showed me a chart of someone who is rather crippled by it, and his Mercury is in Virgo in the 12th house, retrograde while maltreated by both Mars in Taurus and Saturn in Capricorn while it's also retrograde. Also interesting, and not necessarily something that I understand or plan to talk about, is that Chiron is in the 10th, forming an exact aspect sextile to Mercury. And hey, I too also have an exact aspect with Chiron to Mercury. Anyways, I know that for most people that was just a bunch of gibberish, so come back sometime in the future when I've covered these topics and listen to it again. Wink wink. The main takeaway should be that Mercury influences a lot, and much of it occurs outside of what I've mentioned here alone. A poorly placed Mercury can make someone unaware of the way that they talk to others, make their speech aggressive, or even make them speak in such a way that leaves you feeling like they are trying to control you.
Go to the bathroom! You're shitting yourself!
Just as likely, however, are the more positive aspects, such as ingenuity and a way of speaking that warms the heart. Mercury, by the way, rules over the signs Gemini and Virgo. Moving on, in many cases I see a star or planet's visibility and activity as symbolic of its presence in the world. The sun represents truth, yet though it blesses us by revealing itself to us, you can't look directly at it without being harmed by its light. Although the moon may reflect this truth, it waxes and wanes, only fully visible for moments at a time. In many ways, so too is it with people, with their inner nature hardly ever being on full display, even to themselves, and only so as a reflection. In a similar way, Venus is the brightest planet, and love and beauty are perhaps the most abundant of all things in the world. Venus is often visible even during the day, if you know where to look. Perhaps its visibility is in some way symbolic to the relationship that we have with love, sometimes obscured just out of view, but always closely revolving around what we are at the core. Yes, love is the most powerful force known to man. It often outshines the intellect, violence, growth, and restriction, yet it is close, never far away from being blindingly overshadowed by the ego. But also often unable to stand the test of raw emotion. Similar to Mercury, it is, at max, only 48 degrees separating from the Sun, allowing it to be up to 2 signs away. While I think that every placement can have some say in art, Venus and Mercury are probably the two that I'd pin down as being the most artistic in nature. Venus having a strong say in the message and style, whereas Mercury having more of a say on execution, finesse, and, finer little details. Venus is a benefic, meaning that it's a planet indicating positive things, desire, love, beauty, grace, friendship, and children. Your taste and expression of art as well as your possessions. Basically, it has a lot to say about the comforts of life and how you experience them. So for example, my editing styles is very much Aries Venus. I constantly feel as if I have to stimulate both myself and the audience, and I'm very brash and expressive about it. But you can also probably see the 50 stables just barely holding everything together from my Mercury being combusted in the 12th. I tend to read the planets further away from the luminaries as being increasingly less personal and more about circumstances and the things that the native encounters. So, for instance, when Venus is in a Mars-ruled sign, it creates circumstances that are less than favorable for romance. Usually this is generalized as playboy behavior, but speaking from experience as well as having spoken to others about the matter, it tends to make love something that, the native feels like they have to fight for, something that has to be won. At least, that's how it feels. You should view it as Venus acting under the lens of Mars, with Scorpio being more about topics like control, and Aries being about things like domination and momentum. It's as if both of these signs feel the need to possess love, as well as the other things that Venus signifies in some regard, which can most certainly create a stronger desire for them. But the problem tends to be that these things should be balanced and come without effort. In a more positive scenario, the native might learn to sort of balance these things out and, realize that they don't have to give their love all the time. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. They don't have to control anything. When somebody loves you, it just kind of happens. It's sort of like the grand life lesson of, just be yourself, right? A lot of people really look down on this sort of advice, but really, if you think about it, honestly, it's correct. It's right. If you're around people who don't like you, if you're pretending to be somebody else, you're just gonna be miserable, right? In a very similar manner, you can expect that kind of energy coming from, somebody who's got these kind of placements, somebody who has to sort of learn how to operate in a more balanced manner, right? But it also has implications, since these people so desire love. But since this impacts so much more than just, romance and love, let's look at an example in literature and how this can impact an artist. I feel that a really good example would be Shel Silverstein, whose Venus and Moon are not only in Scorpio, but his Sun is in Libra, a Venus-ruled sign. Not only did Shel have a very terrible view on relationships, but he wrote a book called The Giving Tree, which is very on point for imbalanced love, such as the kind that comes from parenting. Something so selfless, something so one-sided, it really just takes so much out of you. And yet it's those moments where you truly have nothing to give, those moments where your love is reciprocated, those simple moments, that's where the beauty is. The book, to this very day, still has a very polarizing reception, with some people thinking that it's beautiful, and some feeling that it's an abusive relationship. And yeah, that's how selfless love can be. But that's not all that he wrote. Shel also wrote a number of other books that are just filled with these ideas about what relationships are, such as The Missing Piece, a children's book about the perils of trying to fill a hole in your life with another person, and how even when things just kind of fit, it just doesn't leave enough room to enjoy the small things in life. Oh yeah, he wrote for kids. Yeah, a lot of people thought that his poems were inappropriate for some reason. Can't imagine why. Anyways, Venus can fit all kinds of different molds, and I've seen it play out in quite a few different ways, varying with its placement.
If you ain't gonna date me, if you ain't gonna give me none of that fat jumbo honey bun ass, don't tell me I'm fucking handsome, bitch. Shut the fuck up.
By the way, Venus rules over the signs Taurus and Libra. The fifth traditional planet is Mars, which can tell you a lot about somebody's struggles in life. Mars is considered a malefic planet, meaning that it's considered bad news in a lot of cases, but also it represents the way that you tackle these problems. At the same time, some of these difficulties may be considered subjective. For instance, having to go up the stairs isn't so difficult until you're in a wheelchair, and for some reason, you're just very insistent, hell-bent even, on using them. Life didn't have to be this difficult, but your ascendant is ruled by an out-of-sex Saturn in opposition to Mars, and anyone telling you to use the elevator is talking down to you. In fact, because of a fun-box variety of other placements aspecting Mars, you demand that the city start building more stairs, and you explicitly state that, quote-unquote, all other cripples are faking it. You are a controversial figure who can never quite find peace in life. Everything is an upstairs battle, and people are appalled by your behavior, yet enthralled, and some even inspired. But in a more practical example, if Mars is in Cancer, then the native's aggression will relate to matters of the moon, which is a place that Mars struggles. I've heard stories about people lashing out as a result of this placement, but I've often seen a weak Mars as somebody struggling to assert themselves generally, with Cancer Mars in particular relating to the emotions. The sign that the moon is in will be important, but if the moon is in a particularly bad condition, the native will struggle to exert themselves in a natural way that actually matters. Keep in mind that these things are about your circumstances and how you're treated just as much as they are about you. I know that it's really popular to just assign personality traits to placements, and to some extent they can certainly show these things, but that's because of how a person's environment and lot in life can impact someone. Even your least favorite placement can bring out the best in someone if the circumstances align. It's important to see the native as a real human being with a real history whenever you're reading. Anyways, Mars may not be the most bright planet in the sky, but it certainly is one of the most unique. It's hard to miss since it's a reddish-orange color that sticks out at night, giving it a really striking appearance. Mars represents a lot of things. A lot of violent and unpleasant things. It is the planet of war and violence after all, but it also relates to plenty of things that are good when expressed in healthy ways, such as drive, masculinity, and such.
Yes, we can.
It also deals with cheating, love affairs, and you really would not believe half of the stuff that it signifies when it's forming a so-called positive aspect. And let me just tell you right now, trines are not always good, okay? Trines are very much not always good. I think it just goes without saying that Mars can very much be a scary planet to behold, especially if it's in a superior position when forming a trine or some other kind of aspect. Oh, by the way, Mars rules over everyone's favorite sign, Scorpio. And it also rules over Aries. Second to last is Jupiter, everyone's favorite planet. Second in brightness only to Venus, this big-ass planet really makes itself known.
Damn, boy, he's thick!
Roughly every 12 years you'll go through what is called a Jupiter return, a major upswing in life's circumstances. Essentially, it's one of the most noticeable planets in transit. Transit, by the way, sounds exactly how it is. Think of it sort of like the planets are trains making stops at places, and things just kinda happen when they get there.
In other words, you could say it's a real train wreck.
Sort of like the mood or vibe of that part of your life, but also indicating literal things that may occur. Wherever it is in your chart, whether it be natal or in transit, shows a number of things, such as growth or luck.
Holy fuck. I'm coming.
Although it is a benefic, and thus very rarely considered to be bad, it is important to take its placement in mind. Jupiter on the descendant can cause luck in relationships, but since the descendant is on the other end of the ascendant, I've noticed that the placements here can get in the way of the path that the native is taking in life. Jupiter has a very good energy to it though, so don't let me convince you otherwise. Generally, whatever it touches turns to gold, and it can show the areas of life that you'll find abundance in. And it is especially positive for Jupiter to be making favorable aspects to the other planets as it blesses them with its presence, and the nature of those blessings will be found in the sign and house as well as where those signs it rules over are situated. I know though that I'm being vague because Jupiter is a bit of a vague and hard to explain planet. So let's use a real life example to give you an idea of how this can play out. Here's Elon Musk's chart. Also, before I begin, I know that he's a bit controversial, but this is just a reading. I'm not trying to glaze the man, he just has a very straightforward chart. And since he's an important figure, it's not going to be very hard for you to find all this information for yourself, and it's not going to be hard for you to fact check me, basically. Anyways, in his chart, his Jupiter is in the 5th house, which is the house of good fortune. Also a bit vague, as it covers a lot of different topics, one of which we'll discuss in a bit. But for now, all you need to know is that the houses are areas of life, and a planet ruling over or being inside of a house impacts how it behaves. Elon Musk's Jupiter controls his 6th and 9th house, as it is the ruler of Sagittarius and Pisces. These houses are called cadent, and to simplify things, all cadent houses have the topic of travel in common. but it also relates to the locations in said travel. Most important is that the 3rd and 9th houses are far better signifiers of actual travel and the native's relationship to it. The 3rd deals with short distance travels, whereas the 9th deals with longer distances, like say, to another state or even country. Elon Musk has his Mercury in the 1st house, which will have a very large role on everything that he does. Both his ascendant and Mercury are conjunct to 2 fixed stars, Sirius and Canopus, although Canopus is far more important here, as it is known for its influences in navigation. Also of note is that his Mercury controls the 3rd and 12th houses, the 12th often being associated with the internet due to its relationship with foreign countries as well as isolation. The 3rd house also contains his lot of fortune, which can be used to ascertain details of his career. He's basically known primarily for things relating to travel, as well as helping pioneer automated GPS navigation. Anyways, that's a lot of setup. What does it mean? Well, in 1995, after his Jupiter return, he formed a company that would eventually be called Zip2. It's often referred to as Yellow Books, but online. The idea is that you'd be able to put in a zip code and find the location of any business in an area and get personalized directions there as well. He says that he got the seeds for the idea while he was working during a summer internship, while Jupiter would have been transiting to the 5th house. What's important here, however, is that Elon Musk says that he got the idea when he was 23 and considers himself to have started the project at the age of 23.
And how old were you when you started this company, or what became this company?
23.
Although work on the project itself started much later, in a chart where delays are to be expected for Jupiter. During this time, everything in the 1st house would have been influenced by Jupiter eventually, and his Mercury and Ascendant in particular would receive an extended trine prior to all of this, which I think is important as it implies an extended expansion of this energy that would later be revisited once Jupiter passed back over it. Also interestingly, Jupiter went direct while forming a trine with his Sun, meaning that it would have parked there for a while as well, spreading its influence over a large part of the summer. The idea wasn't an immediate one, and took some time to develop even after the incident that he says inspired it, as he simply wanted to utilize the internet in some form. It wasn't until much later, at an unknown date, when he was struggling to figure out what he wanted to create on the internet, that this idea would come into fruition. If I had to place a bet on the strongest time frame for this idea, it would be around the end of November 1994, as there are various interactions in his chart around this time, a number of which involved Jupiter and his Sun. However, it wouldn't be until a full year later that the website itself would go live. I know that was a very intense and quite frankly complicated example. Don't worry if you didn't get everything. Part of the point is to express that Jupiter's influence is much like the planet itself, broad and all-encompassing in a way that just fits into a much bigger picture. Its impact is oftentimes the things that we miss and take for granted. Now, as for what Jupiter conveys natally, Jupiter in the 5th is a classic sign of having a lot of kids, but his 5th house is also Scorpio, which is considered a fertile sign. Jupiter is retrograde, however, which I generally take to signify delays or struggles.
I'm a virgin.
As you can see in this example, Jupiter, as with every other planet in your chart, is not inherently acted on at every point in your life. This chart is noteworthy in a couple of other ways, so we'll have to come back to it some other time when I talk about those topics in another video. Oh, and as I mentioned before, Jupiter rules over Sagittarius and Pisces. Anyways, on to Saturn. Saturn is the least bright out of all of the planets. In fact, it is harder to see than many stars. It symbolizes the areas in life where we deal with restriction, and the things that we do as a result, such as hard work. If Jupiter represents the things in life that are given to you with ease, then Saturn is the things that are restrained from you, and the things that bind you. This is really interesting to me because a lot of the time, the things that hold us back in life are the things that are, least apparent. We're always aware of something getting in the way, and that degree of frustration most certainly is apparent, but oftentimes we misattribute our frustration. For instance, how many people do you know that are frustrated that, they aren't in a relationship, but haven't stopped to think about if they're really even ready for one? Sometimes things are meant to be a certain way to give us some perspective in life and teach us a valuable lesson about the true worth and value of what it is that we so desire. Saturn tends to work rather straightforward, but it can produce a lot of funny things as a result. In the case of a lack of love in or out of a relationship, what do we do to cope? See prostitutes. Yes, the bit at the start of the video about lying with prostitutes is in a description from Vettius Valens. Valens really hits you with a slam dunk the second that he starts talking about malefic planets. Yes, Saturn is a malefic planet, meaning that it has outwardly negative effects on your life and its circumstances. What you do with those circumstances circumstances, however, are up to you. There's a really funny transit that it does that is somewhat similar to Jupiter, called a Saturn return, where generally you can expect to deal with some of the restrictions that it imposes, and even get some form of relief from them afterwards. The problems of life are pulled to the forefront and you are made to deal with them. Sometimes though, things just kind of work out and restrictions are less physical than anything. It took me a while to figure out that astrology was more than just the sun signs, for instance, and my Saturn is in the 9th house, which rules over astrology and divination. It wasn't like I wasn't looking for these things either. I just kind of get distracted and wind up on some site telling me that I was going to have sex and then die, because, you know, I'm a Taurus and the writers just wanted clicks. But if you want a more certifiable example, let's go back to Elon Musk's chart. You can see in his chart that Saturn forms in opposition to Jupiter, and in this way you can see that his chart is conveying that Elon Musk will have a lot of kids later on in his life, but not immediately. So, for how long? Well, Saturn takes a little bit less than 30 years to transit back to itself, and it controls the 7th house in his chart. The 7th house rules over relationships with others, oftentimes in a romantic sense. In this case, the transit is very direct and literal. Elon Musk married his first wife during his Saturn return and had his first child. Out of 14, the man has had 14 children. So a future me here, I was a little bit wrong. It turns out that Elon Musk actually had his marriage with his wife while Saturn was transiting to Taurus here. You can actually see here that Saturn is trining his moon. The moon indicates marriages as well. Just an interesting little thing, you know? Lastly, Saturn rules over Aquarius and Capricorn. And with that, we can look back over the signs. As you can see, we start with the first two luminaries and their signs, Cancer for the moon, Leo for the sun, and then the signs expand outward on both sides in relation to the distance each planet has to the sun. So, Mercury's signs surround the sides of the luminaries, followed by Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. This is the Thema Mundi. It's supposedly the birth chart of the universe, but it also serves as a neat way to understand rulership and why it is the way that it is. In modern rulership, they use the generational planets for co-rulership, but I don't use that, as I feel that it's a little bit too tacked on. I also will not be talking about the generational planets today. I do think that they're important, but I think that they're one of the last things that you should learn about in regards to the basics, because the astrology community is kind of, bad?
Today's subject, slavery.
Let's take a look at what they have to say about a placement that I have. Sun trine Uranus. I have this in an exact aspect trine. It's about 1/4 of a degree of difference, which is very, very rare. So this description should not only be very accurate, it should be very powerful as well. So let's see what they got wrong. And let's see what they got right. Now, let's be a little bit more critical about what they did get right. What parts of this aren't confirmed by other placements in my chart? But my chart is a little bit unique, and I know that I can't really judge it off on my own. It's a little bit unfair to just say that it doesn't click, so here's my chart. You might notice that all 3 of the generational planets are aspecting my sun, 2 of which are very close, and I don't really agree with how any of them are interpreted. Maybe you can attribute that to, like where they are in my chart, that being in blind spots, but whatever. Personally though, the way that I've interpreted my Uranus in the 8th is it being responsible for all the unique encounters that I've had with others over the years. It's helped me to develop a unique worldview that I don't think that many other people have. That being that the world is crazy, insane, and everyone else is just kind of pretending that it's not. The more that I read about real things that have happened in the world, the more that I feel that the world is just, it's gaslighting me. The world is gaslighting me. That's how I feel. Anyways, I'm somewhat lacking in quality sources for things on the generational planets, and I wouldn't know where to look. I generally don't feel comfortable interpreting people's generational planets unless, it has an effect that's really obvious that I can just sort of throw out there. It's obvious what it does.
Honesty is the best policy. Stop lying to me! Stop fucking lying to me!
But that hasn't ever gotten me any points knocked off of my score. I just think that it's best to err on the side of caution, and above all else, please, for the love of God, I am begging you, stop using it in Sinistry. Please, I am begging you. unless you are dating Leonardo DiCaprio, I really don't want to read about how this relationship was ruined by his Pluto placement. I want you to understand just how slow this planet moves. And then I want you to look at your chart and understand that it is you. You are the problem. It's you. It's fucking you. And, yeah, that's basically it for the planets themselves. There's a lot more if you want to get into the other more complicated methods of reading, but that is it for now. Now I'm just going to kick back and talk to you all, minimal editing. I know that I talked a lot about things that we didn't really cover today, such as the casual dropping of aspect terminology and, you know, some of the logic used within the houses, but please understand that it's unavoidable if we want, you know, a really juicy experience. I tried to convey a lot of information visually as well, so hopefully some of it sticks even if, you know, it doesn't all make sense just yet. There's plenty of things that I didn't get to discuss, but, you know, we're gonna get there eventually. I hope to cover the signs next, which your newfound knowledge of the planet should help you to understand more clearly, especially since I'd like to teach you all how to understand rather than just, you know, throw out buzzwords associated with the sign. Every Aquarius placement, you know, no matter what the planet is, just like a quirky innovator, for instance, we're gonna curb that early. We're gonna curb stomp that into the ground. Anyways, I'm starting a Discord server. You can feel free to join it, and we can just, you know, chat about the stars if you like. I also neglected to mention the name of this series, partially because I changed it at some point when I realized that I want to cover a lot of different topics. This is Helpful Astrology Club of Knowledge and Study, or HACS for short. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to support more of them, I have a Ko-fi. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.